Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen wa salatu wa salamu ala Rasulihil Kareem. Uh, we are fortunate to have Dr. Imtiyaz Yusuf, who is going to speak on Islam and Buddhism relations over the ages and current trends. Dr. Imtiyaz Yusuf specializes in the study of religion with a focus on Muslim-Buddhist relations and dialogue. He has taught at universities in the US, Thailand, and Malaysia. He recently retired from the International Institute of Islamic Thought and Civilization in Kuala Lumpur, where he was an associate professor and the coordinator for the Islamization of Knowledge program and also the Islam and Buddhism program. He has written a number of books, co-authored a number of books, and has published papers in prestigious journals on Islam and various aspects of religion, especially on Buddhism and Islam relationship. He was with me at the Aligarh Muslim University, earning his master's in Islamic studies. Then we both moved to Philadelphia at Temple University, from where he earned his PhD in religion. And then he taught for a while in Texas, and then moved to Thailand, where he specialized in Buddhist-Islam relationship. I'm also thankful to all of you who are present here, as well as those who have joined us through Zoom. And I hope that his lecture will be very beneficial, inshallah. So I invite Dr. Imtiyaz Yusuf to enlighten us on the topic of today's presentation. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Thank you very much, Brother Ahmadullah Siddiqui, for inviting me to give this talk on Islam and Buddhism relations in the past and present. It's a very rare topic. And first, let me say personal thanks again to Brother Ahmadullah, because we know each other for more than 40 years now. And whenever I come to the United States, we meet, and he also makes opportunities for me to give talks on a topic like this, a rare topic, and a topic of less interest to Muslims today. While Asia is rising, Muslims are neglecting the rise of Asia and how to interact with Asian religions. For example, we know so many things are happening in India, in Sri Lanka, and in Myanmar, and then up to Japan. This is a large world of Buddhism and Islam. In fact, Southeast Asia, the two main religions of Southeast Asia are Islam and Buddhism. 42% of the Muslims in Southeast Asia are 42% population of Muslims in Southeast Asia is Muslim, and 40% are Buddhist. So it is very important that we know about these two religions, 40%, 42%, and 40%. So that is 82%. And if there is a conflict and if there's a misunderstanding, it is very, very consequential for Islam's future, and not Islam's future, the future of Muslims in the region. So that is the important dimension. So let me make my share my slide presentation here with you. So my topic today is Islam and Buddhism relations in our ages and current trends. So Islam and Buddhism are major, as I said in the beginning, they are the two major religions of Southeast Asia. Muslims make up 42% of the population of Southeast Asia, and Buddhists are 40%. So Islam is the largest religion in the world, while Buddhism is a part of an important countries of today. And Islam has shared a long interreligious and intercultural exchange with Buddhism in India, Central Asia, and Southeast Asia. So Buddhist-Muslim understanding is very critical at today's juncture, and also in terms of moral, spiritual, cultural, and political interaction and interrelations between the Muslims and Buddhists, and Islam and Buddhism. So my presentation is going to go a little bit into the history, because many people don't know the history of Islam and Buddhist relations, and then I will talk about the current state of affairs between the two religions. My presentation is from the perspective of a Muslim looking at Buddhism, and my approach is based on phenomenology and history of religion. It is not polemical. I'm not interested in criticizing other religions. This is how I was trained at, because I did my PhD in Temple University with Professor Ismail Al-Faruqi. Phenomenological approach says that we have to understand other religions as they understand themselves. But by understanding the religions of the other people, it does not mean that our iman is undermined, or it is weakened, or is eroded. No, rather it is strengthened, and it enables us to engage in dialogue and dawah and understanding, if you can interchange dawah and dialogue, and build human bridges between cultures, civilizations, and religions, because civilizations are based on religions. And the other point I want to say here is that I believe religions are like parallel lines. I use the scientific definition that parallel lines do not meet except at a station, and then we like a train which stops at a station. Then people get down, they meet each other, they exchange their views with each other, and then we go to the next stage. So I'm not a perennialist. I don't say all religions are the same, and I say yes, Islam is superior, but it is superior for us, but it is maybe not superior for others. So we have to work on a paradigm that we start where we're saying that each religion is unique in itself. So instead of emphasizing on ideological superiority of religion, it is better to talk about the uniqueness of each religion. This is a very rare photo I'm sharing here of the Dalai Lama. He is meeting with the Muslim Tibetan Muslims. There's a large population of Muslim Tibetan Muslims with whom he had very close relations and still has close relations with the Buddhists. And the other photo on my right hand side is that he is wearing a topi, like a Muslim cap, skull cap, and he's praying at a shrine of Nizamuddin Aulia in Delhi. The Dalai Lama, whenever I've met him, and he always talks about that before, when he was born and before he was appointed as the Dalai Lama, because a Dalai Lama is reborn. He says there was a Muslim merchant in the town of Lhasa who said that he would be the future Dalai Lama, and he said his prediction of becoming a Dalai Lama was first identified by a Muslim. This is another photo I'm sharing here with you. Is what what I do. It is a photo of from a conference where I did a Muslim-Buddhist conference in Thailand at the College of Religious Studies at Mahidol University. Here you have an imam sitting with two monks, and they all look happy. You know, we can have religious fraternity in spite of religious difference, and you can see the smiling face. The person on my left, the monk, he's a very senior monk, and he is a monk who is very deep in vipassana meditation, which is very deep meditation in Buddhism. So sharing with this picture, and I also talk about I people when I say about no supremacy of Islam in this particular slide, it does not mean that Islam is supreme for me, but Islam also talks about interfaith relations. So Islam has an internal side where it is supreme. It is supreme for us, but at the same time, Islam has the other aspect of interfaith relations. And this verse is from Surah Al-Ma'idah is rather neglected by the Muslims. Uh, when we engage or understand ourselves or self-understanding of a Muslim, this verse talks about fastabiqul khairat, in which it says basically that had Allah wanted, Allah would have created all of us same, but He has made us different. Not only to know each other, like we talk about lita'arafu, but it also talks a very important aspect that we compete with one another in doing good works. And if we compete with another in doing good works, it will build to better fostering of interreligious relations and understanding. So you see, Quran is a very uh, inclusive revelation, and we have as Muslims, since Islam is the last religion of 1400 years, we have the benefit of understanding of all the religions which came and emerged before the coming of Islam. So that is important verse of the Quran. Now, when we look at the history of relations between Islam and Buddhism, it is as old as Islam. First Muslim Buddhist contact happened in 7th century in Sindh, when Muhammad bin Qasim landed in the Sindh region, and he met the Buddhists there, and he wrote to the Khalifa, the Khalifa at that time is the Umayyad Caliphate, Hajjaj bin Yusuf, and he said, "What should I do with these people? How should I relate with these Hindus and Buddhists of the Sindh?" And the reply came from Damascus saying that you treat them as Ahl al-Kitab. So the concept of Ahl al-Kitab, which was limited and restricted to only Christians and Buddhists, was extended as Islam encountered other religions. It encountered Zoroastrianism in Persia, but it also met with the Hindus and Buddhists in Sindh, excuse me, in India. And then in the 18th century, Muslims translated several Buddhist works into Arabic language, like Bilawar or Buddha Saf, Kitab al-Buddh, and there is evidence of Muslims learning about Buddhism. And then it goes on in Central Asia. Now, my discovery of Islam and Buddhism happened when I was a student in Aligarh Muslim University. At that time, there were none of these gadgets which we have today. Neither there was any internet. And I used to sit in the library of Aligarh Muslim University and go through the journals. And incidentally, one day I opened a journal which was called the Journal of the University of Colombo, Sri Lanka, and there was an article there which talked about early contacts between Islam and Buddhism. And I was shocked, and I said, "Oh, this is something very strange. I've never heard about this thing," because we know about interaction and relations between Islam and Christianity, Islam and Judaism, Islam and Hinduism. But I said, "Oh, is there such thing like our relations with Islam with Buddhism?" So that got me started. And later on, when I went to Temple University, we had to study two religions besides ours. So I studied Christianity and Buddhism, and maybe it is Allah's wish that have landed in this situation, that I have specialized and focused all my research on Islam and Buddhism. I just want to share with you that I'm one of the very few persons who are engaging in Islam and Buddhist dialogue, Muslim Islam Buddhist understanding. So this is a neglected area, but is very important with the rise of Asia. And it is also important in other point that today, while we are talking about Islamophobia, we are ignoring the rise of Asian Islamophobia. I use this term in my writings, the rise of Asian Islamophobia, where the Buddhists and the Hindus are reading about Islam, learning about Islam and Muslims, not from Muslim sources, not from Muslim scholars, because we don't talk to them. Rather, they are reading the old Islamophobic literature, which is translated into Korean, into Japanese, into Thai, into name the language, into Vietnamese, into Cambodian language, and then they get this this image of Islam as a terrorist religion. This gets expanded, and it gets imbibed in the Asian mind. So even the Asians are having a bad image of Islam. So it is critical that we need to talk with the Buddhists, we need to talk with the Taoists, we need to talk with the Confucianists. So we don't have to only engage with the Christianity and Judaism. Now, I want to share here something very personal. Why do I engage in Islam and Buddhist understanding? This is my personal thing. I have been seeing that Muslims have been engaging with Christians and and the Jews for 1400 years. There are so many dialogues and so many meetings, and it's all goody talk, But still, they don't respect my prophet. Still, they don't recognize Nabi Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam as a prophet after Jesus and after the prophets of the Jewish tradition. So I said to myself, why should I waste my time with these people who are not interested in recognizing and respecting my prophet? While Asian religions, when we present Islam to them and the personality and the role of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam on the world stage, they appreciate, they get an understanding of Nabi Muhammad and the Quran, which they don't know anything about. So you see, we are lacking in engaging with Asian religions. So this is my task where I engage in with Asian religions. There are several videos about me talking about Islam and Buddhism on YouTube. You can search them and you can look at them. And these initiatives are taken by the Buddhists. Now, when I go back to my presentation here, At-Tabari, the famous historian, has reported there were Buddhist idols which were sold in a Buddhist temple next to a mosque in Bukhara, in Uzbekistan. And then in the 12th and 15th century, Islam and Hindu Buddhist civilization had an encounter in Southeast Asia, that is Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand. And then when we look at the madrasas, which are called as pondoks or pesantren in Southeast Asia, they are basically modeled on the Buddhist temple schools. Now, let me say a little bit, let me go back and here. And when I talked about Bukhara, we hear the name of Imam Bukhari all the time on Friday mosques. In the khutbah, the khatib always talks about this is from Sahih Bukhari, this is from Sahih Bukhari, this is what Imam Bukhari's hadith. But the term Bukhara and Bukhari actually it is not an Arabic. Imam Bukhari was not an Arab. He was from Uzbekistan. The word Bukhara is from Vihara or Vihari. And Vihara means a monastery, a Buddhist monastery. And a Vihari is a person who comes from the city of Buddhist monasteries. So you see, even the laqab, the last name of Imam Bukhari, the great hadith scholar, has an identification of his lineage, his identification with a city which was at one time a Buddhist city. And of course, afterwards they became Muslims. So such a rich tradition we have, and it needs to be explored and expanded upon. So uh, we have this interaction with Islam and Buddhism much earlier. I'll come more into detail later on. But the first book by a Christian scholar writing about Buddhism only takes place in the 19th century when a French scholar writes by the name of Eugene Burnouf, he's a scholar of Sanskrit, and he writes a book titled Introduction Le History Le Buddhisme Indien, Introduction to Indian History of Indian Buddhism. And it set the background for Western studies about Buddhism. And while the Muslims have abandoned the study of Buddhism, today Buddhist, Christian, Buddhist, Jewish dialogue is a very, very vibrant movement. It's very strong. In fact, there is a journal which has been published by the University Press of Hawaii, University Hawaii Press, titled Buddhist Christian Studies. And I have my articles in there. I'm one of the rare Muslims publishing because I don't have a platform. I don't have a Muslim platform where I can write about Islam and Buddhism. When I was invited by the Buddhists in Japan, so actually it was a meeting between the Christians and the Buddhists, but I was invited, and then I wrote my papers, and they got published in that journal. So you see, I kind of felt odd that why my paper is published in a journal for Christian Buddhist studies. So it is time the seminaries, the universities, and the departments of Islamic studies around the world take note of this. You see, I don't, I'm say 60 years old now, but I want to see the rise of new scholars, young generation who would be interested in continuing what I have started, and several other people are also have started in Buddhist-Muslim relations. Now, Al-Biruni, as we know, is the first historian of religion. He is respected. He is, if I say very frankly, the founder of the study of comparative religion. And he studied Hinduism. He studied Sanskrit. He went to live with the the Hindu priests in the temples. And in his Kitab al-Tariq al-Hind, he presents Hinduism as Hindus understand it. Now, this is very interesting. And he says that his book, Kitab al-Tariq al-Hind, is not a polemical book. I shall not produce, I'm quoting him, I shall not produce the arguments of our antagonists in order to refute them, as I believe to be in the wrong. My book is nothing but a simple historical record of facts. I shall place before the reader the theories of the Hindus exactly as they are, as they understand. I shall mention in connection with them similar theories of Greeks in order to show the relationship existing between Hinduism and the Greeks. And then in another section of his book, he says what he's writing about Hinduism will not be liked by the Muslims. But you see, we have to become impartial scholars before we start understanding and building bridges between Islam and Asian religions, because most of our understanding is based on ignorance or hearsay in today's time. The first person, again, a great scholar, Abdul Karim Shahrastani, who again is regarded as the pioneer of the study of history of religions in the 11th and the 12th century. He is honored by Eric Sharp in his book as the first historian of religion. He writes about the Buddha as being one among the 124,000 prophets that have appeared in human history and in different languages. Basically, Asharastani is taking this idea that the Buddha could have been a prophet because the Quran says that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has sent his prophets in every place and in every language. And these prophets spoke in the language of their own people. That means they brought the message of Islam, not Islam as we understand today, but the message of belief in the supreme, of supreme God or supreme ultimate reality to their people, bilisanihi, in their language. So we have a lot of homework to do in this area. So in from 11th and 13th century, where Muslims were already studying Buddhism. The second person here is Rashid al-Hamdani. He was a Jewish convert to Islam. He wrote his book Jamia Tawarikh, in which he was a wazir during the Mongol period, and he wrote this first world history. And he also made the aim of the one section of the book of his work is to make Muslims understand what is Buddhism all about. So let me show some paintings from that book. Now here, this is a very interesting portrait painting, which was commissioned by Hamdani, and here this is the portrait painting of the Buddha. You have never seen the Buddha in this form. Here is the Buddha is in a Oriental garb or a Middle Eastern garb with turban, and he's on the person sitting on the right side of the portrait as I see it is the Buddha before he gets enlightened, and on the other side is the Mara or the Shaitan in the Buddhist tradition, who is trying to stop the Buddha in the night struggle before the Buddha gets enlightened or gets the Nirvana or Nibbana. So this is a painting made by the Muslims, but we have never seen this before because we don't know. We have ignored the study of Asian religions. Second, in the same book, there is this painting of the forest in which the Buddha achieved enlightenment. This is another painting also from the same book. This is from Kushinagar, the place where the Buddha entered into what they call as Mahaparinirvana. That is the end of rebirth. So here, and then when we come to modern time, Muhammad Iqbal, Allama Muhammad Iqbal, very interesting, has a poem in Bang-e-Dara. I'm not going to read the Urdu part. He wrote it in Urdu, and he talks about the message of the Buddha. And his poem is titled Nanak, but it is basically emphasizing on an appreciation of Gautama, the message of Gautam Buddha. And he talks about how the Buddha was a champion of equality against the practice of casteism in India. And he said the Indian Brahmins ignored the message of the Buddha. And here he says that it is the message. It was the message of the Buddha was the lamp of truth. It brought about the reign of mercy on India, but Indian Brahmins were so proudful of such arrogance in their caste system that they did not like his teaching. So Buddhism spread out of India. It doesn't exist anymore in India, but it exists in Mehfil Aghyar. It is in Urdu, which means today Buddhism exists outside India, in Southeast Asia, in Central Asia, and other parts of the world. And then he ends the poem with Nanak. Allama Iqbal in Javed Nama also has another poem titled Tahsin-e Gautam, or Gautam Buddha ki Talimat, and he talks about what can we learn from the Buddha. And he takes the model, he talks about the beauty of a dancing girl and compares it with the message of the Buddha. I'm not going to read this poem because it is very long, but let me go direct to the final point which he makes. He said, what we can learn from the Buddha is that the beauty, of human body, of human person, lives only for a moment. Means everything is impermanent. That is what the Buddha says. And the moment is no more. But what lasts in the end is the beauty of action, or karma, or as we say, amal in Islam. And that is something we learn from the Buddha. And in Islam, we have the Quran always emphasizes illa allazina amanu wa amilu salihat. So here is a parallel, that action, amal is very important. Same thing in Buddhism. The karma, the action, kamma or karma, is very important because that has an if cause and effect on the for the Buddhists on their rebirth, their and achieving of nirvana or nibbana. So if you don't do good action, you are more reborn in the Buddhist tradition. But if you do good action, you are not reborn. You enter into into the realm of nibbana or nirvana, or it is also called as Brahma Vihara. That is the land of God or the space of God. If I use this term to parallelize it for Muslim understanding. So, what are the main differences? Now, here is very challenging for the Muslims. Muslims, Christians, and Jews, our religions are God centric, where God is the creator, God is the center. But Buddhism is non theistic religion. It is not atheistic, it does not deny God. Rather, and it does not deny ultimate reality, but it says what is important today, because the time of the context is important. At the time of the Buddha, was that uh, human, it is important for paying attention to the suffering of humanity, the suffering of the human being, and suffering of human being is caused by social injustice. So the Buddha's message is that we should emphasize on the equality of human being and achieving of justice. For example, he says that if somebody is hit by an arrow, what will you do? Would you go and treat him, or you will spend your time asking where did the arrow come from, who hit the arrow, what was the angle of the arrow? He said, or will you take him for treatment to a hospital? So he says the human suffering in India at that time was terrible, and is still now, for the lower classes, for the lower castes of the Shudras, and of the low caste and the outcasts, and that has to end. So for Muslims, when we study for Buddhism, we have to suspend our understanding and try to understand of a religion which is non-theistic, in which God is not central. And at the same time, we I tell the Buddhists that they should not look for nirvana, the concept of rebirth in Islam, because we as Muslims, we don't believe in rebirth. But on the third point, which is my last paragraph here, that there is another very interesting point on which Muslims and Buddhists can dialogue is the concept of ummatan wasatan. Islam talks about Muslims as being the people of the middle path. And the Buddha also talks about his way as being the middle way, Majjhima Patipada, which means against extremism, against intolerance, and importance of social, religious interchange and dialogue. So when you go to the Quran only mentions 25 prophets of the Middle East, of the Semitic tradition. But at the same time, Allah says in this Quran, in the Quranic verse in Surah Ghafir, وَلَقَدْ أَرْسَلْنَا رَسُولًا مِنْ قَبْلِكَ مِنْهُمْ مَنْ قَصَصْ عَلَيْكَ وَمِنْهُمْ مَنْ لَمْ نَقْصُصْ عَلَيْكَ. That means, O Muhammad, we have sent forth apostles before your time, and some of them we have mentioned to you, and some of them we have not mentioned to you. This is very interesting. Quran is not a dictionary of religion. Quran is a book of guidance. Quran is a book of principles. So if Quran mentioned 124,000 prophets, it will become a dictionary of religion. So Allah, the teaching of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is so beautiful. And he says, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling the Muslims that I am mentioning some prophets with whom you are familiar in the Arabian theater, but there are also prophets beyond the Arabian theater. So it comes down on us Muslims to do research in history of religion, in phenomenology of religion, and study religions of what my teacher, Professor Ismail al-Faruqi, would talk about pre-Hijrah Islam. Unfortunately, what we do is that we study Islam from the beginning of the Risala of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam until the end of Prophet Muhammad, until the end of the life of Prophet Muhammad, and then the rest of the history. But it is important to understand pre-Hijrah Islam. But pre-Hijrah Islam is Islam after the creation of Adam alayhi salam, and is spread all over the world and in the variety of religious expressions of human history. Okay, there's another verse here also. The Quran here is again talking about prophets coming in their own languages. So when I look at what were the Buddha and Prophet Muhammad looking for, they were basically trying to answer the question of what is human predicament, what is the meaning of being human, why is there suffering, why is there anguish. So the Buddha called it dukkha, or suffering, and the Quran talks about that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created human being in the state of kabad. لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي kabad. That means we are in the state of struggle, toil, and affliction, and we have to, and that ends with taking of the iman in shahada la ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. And for the Buddhists, in the concept of in the teachings of the Buddha, his Four Noble Truths, where he talks about suffering of dukkha, and there's dukkha, there's suffering, there is a cause of suffering, and there's the end of suffering. And when the Buddha talks about the end of suffering, he prescribes the eightfold path. He talks about what a Buddhist should do to end suffering. I'm not going to go into detail about that one here now. So for Prophet Muhammad, the Wahi is the book of liberation, liberation from kufr, liberation from shirk. And for the Buddha, it is end of dukkha. So both of them are, Nabi Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and Buddha are trying to defeat the forces of evil called as Mara in Buddhism or Shaitan in Islam. So something parallel again here. In Islam, Allah is the absolute, and in Buddhism, sunyata or emptiness, the doctrine is what it talks about the natural law, the dharma is absolute. Okay, what was the view of Muslims of the Buddha? I take here clues and references from Professor Muhammad Hamidullah, the great scholar of Islamic studies of our age, the first translator of Quran into French language, and in his book Muhammad Rasulullah, he categorically says the Buddha was a prophet. And this may be surprising for you. Maybe you have never heard it, and you may even contest it. Sometimes when I say this, people get angry with me and they say, why you say that the Buddha is a prophet? But Professor Hamidullah is not a simple scholar. He's a great scholar. He says, he refers to Surah At-Tin, والتين والزيتون وطور سينين وهذا البلد الأمين. He says in this surah there are there are references to four symbols: the fig, the olive, Mount Sinai, and the land, and the safe land. So olive is a reference to Jesus, Isa alayhi salam. Tur Sinin is to Musa alayhi salam, and Balad al-Amin is to Nabi Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. But At-Tin is, in the view of Professor Muhammad Hamidullah, is a reference to the fig tree under which the Buddha was enlightened. So he says it is a symbolic reference to the enlightenment of the Buddha, of including the Buddha as a prophet, because you see, it is a symbolic reference to the Buddha. And Professor Hamidullah also goes further, and when he talks about the references to Zulkifl in the Quran, many of the Muslims have their names like Zulkifl this, Zulkifl that, and Professor Hamidullah says again in his book Muhammad Rasulullah that Zulkifl is a reference to Kapila Vastu, is the place where the Buddha was born. And again, you have two verses here in the Quran which talks about Zulkifl. It says wa Ismail wa Idris wa Zulkifl kull min al-sabirin. They were among the steadfast, or they were among the patient. And the other verse also in Surah 38 mentions about Ismail, Ilyas, and Zulkifl as being the chosen. وَكُلَّ مِنَ الْأَخْيَارِ. Akhyar means they were the chosen one. So Professor Hamidullah sees these as solid references. Now people may contest it, but Professor Hamidullah has the right to, he's not a simple scholar, has the right to make this standpoint. And I stand on his shoulder to make my work legitimate in understanding, for building Muslim and Muslim-Buddhist understanding also, and to study Islam and Buddhist relations. So this may not be when we say, as Muslims, when we say that we accept the Buddha as a prophet, the Buddhists don't like it. I'm sure about it, because they say, "Oh, how can the Quran know about the Buddha?" But I'm just presenting to them what Muslim scholars of the Indian subcontinent have talked about the Buddha. In contrast, the Muslims view the Buddhism as a false religion. So we have to overcome this ignorance which exists on both the sides. Okay, so if I want to conclude this part, what are the essential messages of Prophet Muhammad and the Buddha? The essential message of both of them is liberation. For Prophet Muhammad, it is liberation from Tawheed, or moralistic monotheism, belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as the greatest freedom which human being has. Same thing for the Buddha. Sunyata, emptiness and detachment, is the end of suffering for the humanity, and end of injustice, inequality, and discrimination. So both of them are talking about liberation of humanity from the Arabian, pre-Islamic Arabia, from the Ayyam al-Jahiliyyah, from the period of the Jahiliyyah, and also for Buddha, he talks about from the period of Avijja, from the age of ignorance. Avijja means avidya, avidya means with the age of no knowledge. So the Buddha is trying to move the Indians from the age of avidya, from ignorance, which is similar like Jahiliyyah, to the age of knowledge, of vidya. So vidya is very important. See, these words, since Sanskrit words, are very important. So if you are going to study Buddhism, we have to know Sanskrit. We have to know the Pali. And Muslims in Sri Lanka, in Myanmar, in China, and wherever we are, we have not studied these languages. So these languages are important besides Arabic. And then you see the parallels of how these two languages work, religious languages work. Okay, so Islam and Buddhism share the following values of morality and ethics, liberation, equality, justice, freedom, fraternity, and the importance of the Ummatan Wasatan and the middle way of the Buddha and the Muslims as the middle nation. Now, when we come to modern period, now this is something again very interesting. When Buddhism, when we come to the period between fifth to the 7th century, is the period when Buddhism got consolidated in Southeast Asia. I mean to say about the Indo-Malaysian archipelago. Now, this is 5th to 7th century. It is parallel with the Arabian 7th century, 7th century Arabia, when Islam was rising in Arabia. So Nabi Muhammad's becoming of the Prophet takes place in 7th century in Arabia, while Buddhism consolidates and establishes itself in Southeast Asia. And then from 11th to the 12th century, Buddhism becomes a major religion in Southeast Asia. But from 12th, 13th, 14th, 15th century, Islam becomes established in maritime Southeast Asia. So when we look at the geography here, we'll see that the mainlands of Southeast Asia, from Myanmar, Thailand, Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, is Buddhist, and while the maritime Southeast Asia is the maritime Southeast Asia, I mean Indonesia, Malaysia, Brunei is the region where Islam flourishes. So both of them coexist together, and it's a very interesting historical period, but it is ignored by Muslim scholars who live in this region, and Muslim scholars who live in this region whose language, like the Malay language, the language of Indonesia, is lots of Sanskrit words. For example, I'll give you a few examples later on, but just before I give you an example, one here is that for Ramadan, for fasting, they call it puasa. Puasa comes from upwas. Upwas is fasting. They also use names like Satriya or Santi, or they use many words which culture in their language, in their culture, which are based in Sanskrit, but they practice them as Muslim, like Santi for peace, Satriya is a name for a person, Hari Raya for Eid al-Fitr or Eid al-Adha. So this is similar to like the use of Urdu language in India. And if you want to read more about it, you can read the works by George Geddes, the Indianized States of Southeast Asia, and then A. Jones. A. Jones was an Australian scholar on Australian convert to Islam. I don't know, maybe he's still alive, and he has written a lot on Islam in Southeast Asia, Islam and Buddhism in Southeast Asia, and there are many other scholars. Okay, but from after 9/11, then the relationship between Muslims and Buddhists has further deteriorated. But still, there are Buddhist monks who have taken initiatives of building understanding between Muslims and Buddhists. For example, there's a Taiwanese monk by the name of Dharma Master Santao. He has initiated a lot of dialogues between Muslims and Buddhists. I have attended them. Similarly, the Dalai Lama has expressed his unhappiness of the persecution of the Rohingyas, where he says if Buddha was alive today, he would have helped the persecuted Rohingya refugees. Even Gus Dur, the former president of Indonesia, had a lot of dialogue with the Buddhists from Japan, like Daisuke Ikeda. So here I share some photos of contemporary attempts at building Islam Buddhist understanding There's a photo of the book of Abdurrahman Wahid and Daisuke Ikeda, Majid Tehranian and Ikeda. And there's another photo which is very, very recent this year, where the Dalai Lama is wearing the Malaysian, Indo-Malaysian songkok or kapia, and when a group of the young Abim followers, Abim is a Muslim youth movement of Malaysia, which was founded by Anwar Ibrahim, when they visited Dharamshala, and when they visited, met with the Dalai Lama, and they presented him with the Malaysian cap, and he wore it. So he looks very happy. It's a very, very nice photo. So there are attempts of building Muslim Buddhist understanding. And then there are several books. One of I write in English, but this is one of book of mine which is translated into Indonesian. And there's a book by Riza Shah Kazemi and Chandra Muzaffar and several others, but on common ground between Islam and Buddhism. Now, the destruction of the Bamiyan statue by the Taliban in Afghanistan was a major point where Muslim-Buddhist relations were destroyed. When this happened, actually, I was in the Kaaba, in Makkah. I was doing my Hajj, and I said, "Oh my God, what have they done?" And they blew off this large, huge Buddha statue. The Taliban did that, and this led to the further strengthening of Islamophobia, that Islam is a religion of violence. Now, the Buddhists feel the Buddhists from all part, from Southeast Asia to Japan, are hurt, are pained by this destruction of the Buddha statue in Bamiyan. But they don't go out, like we Muslims do. If somebody burns the Quran, we come out on the streets and we shout and we make protest. But in their heart, they feel the pain. I know them, and I share this pain with them, and I understand, because you see, if somebody destroys the Kaaba, we will feel the same pain. So there's a scholar. She has written a book on the Bamiyan Buddhas, and she says Muslims have made Buddha famous in two ways. One is that they preserved the Bamiyan statue for 1400 years. They were existing in Afghanistan. They did not matter. They did not disturb the iman of the Muslims. But after 1400 years, they destroyed it. So Muslims are kind of digging their own graves. They're destroying their own heritage, inclusive heritage, their pluralist heritage of living alone, and coexistence with other religions. So this is the photo after the explosion of the Buddha statues. So nothing remains, but now there are attempts to rebuild it. But destruction has been done and pain has been made. So it becomes very, very difficult. It becomes very difficult because of the rise of Asian Islamophobia, as I mentioned before. So when we look at Southeast Asia, here is this Southeast Asia from India to Japan. The maritime Southeast Asia is made of Muslims. That is Indonesia, Malaysia, Brunei, and the mainland Southeast Asia is basically Buddhist, from Myanmar to Vietnam. So after that, there's no more. Buddhism is a minority religion in India today, but it is a majority religion in Southeast Asia. Thailand, as I say, is today the Saudi Arabia of Buddhism, by which I mean it is the largest Buddhist country in the world today, and Southeast Asia is the center of the Buddhist world today. When Muslims of Southeast Asia call themselves as they are the veranda of Makkah, while the main intellectual centers of where the Buddhist monks learn about Buddhism today are in Thailand, Myanmar, Sri Lanka, China, and Japan. These are to make parallel. I'd say that they are the Al-Azhar and the Medina universities of Buddhism. And I have taught at some of these Buddhist universities. I taught Islam to Buddhist monks, and I'll show that later on. I've talked about this already. So let me move faster out of here. So yeah, in Southeast Asia, Southeast Asian culture has a religious character. They are not secular. So religion in Southeast Asia is identified with ethnicity. So Malay is a Muslim, a Thai is a Buddhist, a Filipino is a Christian, and a Chinese could either be a Taoist, Confucianist, or a Christian. So religious beliefs is identified with ethnicity. There's less of conversion because conversion means moving from one ethnic group to another ethnic group. But the political culture of Southeast Asia, uh, in Thailand, Myanmar, Cambodia, the kings and the leaders are seen to be the models of the Dharma Raja or Dhamma Raja. And Buddhist and Muslim political culture in Malaysia and Indonesia is where the sultans are seen as the custodians of Islam. So the political culture of Southeast Asia is not secular; it is semi-secular or non-secular. Uh, it is based on religious identity with the ethnicity. As I said to you, there are certain terms. For example, agama, sasana, puasa, hari raya, which are used by Muslims, but basically they are based in Sanskrit language. But today, the Buddhists views Muslims as invaders in Southeast Asia. Now, this is because they read Islam, the history of Islam, from the sources of Orientalists, who many of Orientalist scholars have written about Muslims coming to Southeast Asia as invaders. My writings uh, are, are critical of this approach, uh, but you see, we need to do a lot. My writings are to show that we can build relations on Muslim-Buddhist relations and cooperation. So I have already mentioned this, but it is very interesting to note that Christianity arrived in 15th century in Southeast Asia, and Christianity has spread, and Christianity is welcome, while the Islam has a longer history in Southeast Asia from the 12th century onwards. But today there is no one Southeast Asian Muslim scholar of Buddhism or one Buddhist scholar of Islam. They are emerging, but now very, very slow. I have few students who are now starting to study and do their research on Islam and Buddhism. So it's not late, but it's time we started doing this. There are conflicts going on of which we are familiar. For example, when we look at Sri Lanka, we always think about the Rohingya. I call it the rise of Buddhist nonviolent extremism. We see that also in Sri Lanka and in Myanmar. In Sri Lanka, also the Muslims are being terrorized, and we also see it in southern Thailand of the kingdom of Patani, and that conflict is not a religious conflict, but it is basically an ethno-religious conflict. In Malaysia. But while these conflicts are taking place in Muslim majority countries, the Buddhist minorities are feeling vulnerable to that they will be attacked by the Muslims, and they have been attacked. So we have to pay attention to this, that while the Muslims are living in danger of violence and as minorities, Buddhists are also living in the fear of danger from Muslims in Muslim majority countries. So we have a lot of challenges which to deal with, and we cannot expect, excuse me, I tell the Muslims of Southeast Asia that we cannot expect solutions to come from the Middle East, because the Middle East people, they don't understand what Buddhism is all about. So Southeast Asian Muslims who, or even those who are not in Southeast Asia, have to find out solution so that we can build up friendship and foster better relations, Muslims and Buddhists. I'll just show a few photographs here so that you can understand what are the conflicts going on. This is a radical Buddhist monk in Sri Lanka, and this is for is radical against Muslims, and he's threatening the Muslims. And so this is what is happening in Sri Lanka, after they killed the Tamils. Now they're going after the Muslims. And they have burned Muslim houses. They have done all bad things to the Muslims in Sri Lanka. This is Boloba Dasana, BBS, which is destroying Muslim unity, Muslim Buddhist unity on ground. We need to pay attention to that. This is a famous monk from Myanmar. The Time magazine put him as the face of Buddhist terror. His name is Viratu. He is against the Rohingya. He is against the presence of Muslims in Myanmar. In Myanmar, and he is inciting violence. This is violence against Muslim villages, burning of Muslim masjid. So, and the Rohingya running away, and then they get into the ship. They want to reach Muslim countries like Indonesia or Malaysia. So this is the tragedy of the Rohingyas. So the radical Buddhist monks who are against Muslims in Myanmar. So these are all challenges which we have to address. Same thing in southern Thailand. This is a 200-year-old mosque which was attacked, and in 2004, young Muslims were attacked by the army, and many of them were killed. And this is also a bloody history, which is very, very recent, and we have to be aware of this. Uh, but there's only one, not only one side that the Buddhists are attacking Muslims. Uh, Muslim children go to school under military protection, but at the same time, Buddhist monks have to go to for their daily arms collection with military protection, and Muslims have also killed Buddhist monks. So all these things are are not good in building Muslim-Buddhist relations. Uh, Attacking monks, while there is Quran, Islam is very categorically against attacking religious institutions and religious persons. There have been peace attempts to build relations to solve all these conflicts, like here in Malaysia, the former Prime Minister of Malaysia, and now the current Prime Minister of Malaysia, Anwar Ibrahim, has visited Thailand and also Vietnam and other countries to build Muslim Buddhist understanding. So there's in Indonesia, their national ideology of Pancasila wants to build peace relations between all religious communities in Southeast Asia, in Indonesia, in Thailand. The former king Rama IX, he has a project of self-sufficiency economy in southern Thailand, where he said, yes, the southern Thailand Malay Muslims have a different culture, so we should help them, we should understand them and build Thailand. So Prime Minister of Malaysia, Anwar Ibrahim, has his new agenda program called Madani, based on the model of Medina, uh, where core values are to build peace, are to build sustainability, prosperity, innovation, respect, trust, care, and compassion. And he's very much welcome, and he's very much supported by the Buddhists, by the Christians in Malaysia, because he comes with this very he's a Muslim activist and a politician, comes up with a very inclusive understanding of other religions, and representing Islam as a civilization of as a civilized as a civilized tradition. Uh, and these are some photos I'm going to share with you just a little bit. This is a mosque, in 400-year-old mosque in southern Thailand, but it does not look like a mosque, but it looks like a Buddhist temple. This is a mosque also next to a Hindu temple in Indonesia. And then, of course, the famous Borobudur, the largest Buddhist monument exists in Indonesia, a country of 250 Muslim. And it is not destroyed by the Muslims, alhamdulillah. So we have images, we have preserved and given freedom to the Buddhists to coexist. This is the Buddha statue in Malaysia, in the state of Kelantan, which is bordering southern Thailand. And the Muslims have no problem with the largest Buddha statue being there. So there are many other activities which are taking place. I will not go into them here now. So let me conclude here by saying that we have to overcome biases, prejudices, and it is time that we build better relations and understanding, so that we can live in the age of peace, we can build peace in the age of ignorance. We remove avidya or avicca, or remove jahiliya and the hardness of the heart. No religion or ideology is free from stain of violence. Religious truth is not a property of any one religion, it is available to all. We can build Muslim Buddhist understanding, build bridges, and dialogue is very important, is far, but we have to start with understanding. Otherwise, there'll be clash between Muslims in the ASEAN region, and it is already happening. because of this rise of Asian Islamophobia. So there's a need for interfaith relations, and Muslim community as this socio-cultural community charter, which can be the base for building foundation for building Muslim Buddhist understanding. I want to end up with few photographs here of what I do. Is I did several conferences on Muslim Buddhist understanding when I was teaching in Thailand. Here is Professor Azizan from Malaysia, very famous. She's good in building in civilizational studies, sitting with her next to a monk in a conference on Islam and Buddhism. These are my students. I have taught. I was invited by Buddhist University in Thailand. Buddhist University means where only monks study, and these are my students from Myanmar, Cambodia, China, Vietnam. Name you have it. There's this student sitting in front. She's a nun. She was so frightened in the first class when she entered my class. She said, "Oh, I have to study Islam. Islam is terrorism." But at the end of the class, she was so happy. She said, "If this, what you taught is Islam, then I really appreciate Islam as a religion." So you see, we can take initiatives and we can build relations. These are my other students. Many of them have graduated, and if I teach 10 monks about Islam, they will teach 10 of their community. They go back to their villages in different countries, and the ripple effect takes place. In fact, one of my students is now doing his PhD in SOAS, in SOAS, that is School of Oriental and African Studies in London, and very good relations with me. I also took them to the mosque and meet the Muslims, and the Muslims hosted them in Thailand, gave them their lunch, and they chanted in the mosque complex. So we have to open our mind to them, and then they observe the Jummah prayer, and then they enter the mosque, and they are very happy. Alhamdulillah, So these kinds of efforts build our ground level efforts, and this is the way to build it. So if my 30 students here, these are about 30 students of mine, Buddhism. If they have a good understanding of Buddhism, you see the ripple effect will take place, inshallah. So let me end up here with this and stop my sharing the screen, and we can go. I'll hand it over to Professor Abdullah Siddiqui.
Thank you very much, Dr. Imtiyaz Yusuf. Indeed, it was an excellent presentation. And for me, as well as I'm sure those who are attending in person or via Zoom, a lot of new information you have provided to us, and a perspective, a context from Quran, as well as the recent contemporary Islamic scholars like Dr. Hamidullah, to understand the Buddhist-Islamic relationship. And in the light of your presentation, I'm sure that we can chart out a clear roadmap for interfaith relations, especially with the people of Buddhist faith. So again, thank you very much, and we will stop this presentation here. Inshallah, there will be question, answer, comments, and feedback, but I'm sure that your lecture, once we edit it, we will put it on our website, and many Muslims and Buddhists and non-Muslims will be able to benefit from you. May Allah reward you and bless you. Let's end it with a dua. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر.